So I think testing is a topic that a lot of Rubyists can get really into. When I first started in the community, I feel like we'd go to conferences and all we would do is talk about testing. And so now I've been trying to do proper good TDD and spend time doing things the right way. And I've kind of discovered a few things about my tests. In fact, I feel like they're becoming the other junk drawer. But first, hi, I'm Chris. I work at a little company called Radius Networks. We do a lot of stuff with mobile proximity, things like that. I brought swag, so if you guys are interested in doing things with iBeacons and stuff like that, come and find me. Got some goodies that I can give away, which is my excuse I could use when justifying to the CEO why they needed to pay for me to fly out to Salt Lake City. And the confession I have to make is that my tests are, in fact, a mess. I feel like it's very easy for them to get this way. And I've been spending a fair amount of time working with a couple other engineers, and we all care very strongly about having a good, solid test suite that we can trust. And so now we want to know, is TDD, I want to have maintainable code. I try really hard. What happened? So I think what we need to do is we need to step back a little bit. Let's step back from the code and concentrate on what we really want. Where do we want to go with our test suites? And probably more philosophically, where do we want to go with how we just write our code? So we need to kind of, I think, take that step back and figure out what's important to our domain, what the business actually cares about. So when we want to figure that out, how do we do that? We need a direction. So we need to have our goal. So first of all, we need to test, right? So I think pretty much anybody who is come into this room probably is on board with that. I'd be very surprised if anybody would raise their hand and say that they don't think that there's any need to unit test or to do any testing of any sort. So we know that we want to do that. We can reduce bugs, drive design decisions, and make it easier to change our code. All these things are great. But now we got to manage them tests. And this is another step of complexity on top of that I feel like we haven't necessarily talked about. And this is kind of my attempt to bring it out. But really, what's my real goal behind all of this and thinking about this and waxing philosophically about testing philosophies and all that? I'm not real smart, so I need to keep things very simple. And my purpose is to write code that's not beautiful and super elegant, but I want to write code that in 6 months when I come back to it, that I can understand. I've done this very unsuccessfully in the past where I've written something and come back to it and just, WTF'd all day long, and then I ran git praise, which brings up the list of who edited each line, and it was just my name all the way down. So simple is hard. We really want simple. We really love simple. And I think intellectually everyone kind of buys in and agrees with that, but I'm not sure that everyone really truly believes that. Often I hear people say things like, oh, they built something and it was just so amazing. I can't even understand what it does. That person is a complete and total genius. And we got to change this. I think it's a systemic natural reaction to look at something complicated, have someone go into all of these details on why it's so meticulously fit together. But I'm just going to kind of argue that it's easy to build something complicated. You have the whole thing in your head, and you know all the little moving parts, and you know if you're going to change this, you got to change these 10 other things. And we shouldn't look at that as a good thing. We should strive for the goal of being able to look at it and comprehend what's going on, or at least being able to explain it within some sort of reason. And the other thing why this is so invasive is that once it's very complicated, if you want to add something, you just tack it on top because it's complicated and hard. And so now it's more complicated. There's a difference between complicated and complex. Complex is the number of components in the system. I think this is a very important difference, and whereas complicated refers to a high level of difficulty. It's like there might not be all that moving parts, but they are very interwoven, and it takes a lot of work to solve and to understand what's going on. We should strive towards a bunch of different components that you can reason about and understand what they mean. So let me give you 3 things to consider while writing tests. I have a couple of examples or metaphors here. First one is priority. If you know me, you know I have kids. My son is in his room and he's literally dumping things out and pulling dressers off the wall. And I come in there and I'm just completely irate, and it's a disaster, and I'm like, you've got to clean this mess up. And he looks at me in a very straight face and says, well, I haven't done my homework. Isn't it more important that I do my homework? And yeah, if we're going to stop and reason about it, I completely agree it's more important to do your homework. You're going to get grades on your homework, and no one's going to come into your room, aside from me and his mother, and say that this place is a mess. Well, the exact same thing happens when we're in our priority meetings, and the engineers are talking about this, and we say, we need to go clean up this test suite. Or just one integration test or something. It's just a mess. They're like, okay, well, but do hey, stakeholders, do you want me to do that, or do you want me to build out this new feature? And every single time they want you to build out the new feature. The other thing is the intent. This is my daughter. She was potty training. And she was trying to do what she was told, and she knew she needed to get some toilet paper off the roll. And she just kept pulling, and it just kept coming. She was trying to do what was right. And it ended horribly with a completely empty roll, and she was very sad and had no idea how she got there. So this is an argument for stepping back and figuring out what's going on. As something like this is happening, like often you know what's going wrong, but you don't know anything else to do, and the natural thing is to just keep going. So don't let that backfire. You gotta pay attention and know when to stop. And finally, the other thing that I want to kind of principle is the habit. When you're driving and nobody is around you, use your blinker. There's no reason to use your blinker. No one can see it, but you just got to get into the habit. The same thing, as you're writing these things and you're building out a test suite, even if it's for just a stupid simple problem, and the app doesn't do anything. It's a microblog that only has, so many characters in each post. How many tests could you possibly have? Still, pay attention and keep things clean and tidy and put things where they need to go. Use the blinker every time, even when nobody is around. So we got to know what we need to test. And a lot of this, the complexity is handling all the different cases and worrying about things that probably don't matter, that the business doesn't care about, that the project just doesn't have any concern over. There are things that you really need to test. You need to test the ventilation shaft to make sure that it's covered. But you don't care about the plating on the side of your small planet. So on the high level acceptance tests, I really like acceptance tests, and I want something that is because this kind of functions as regressions, and it functions as a good way to drive the design, especially from a high level of what you actually want, so that you build a system that does what you need. So these are the things that is going to keep the business happy. It's going to keep your boss happy, and it'll prove to you that the whole project is still working. Lower than that are the unit tests. I'm sure everybody here knows what they are. They're this they're all the bits and pieces, and they should be broken up into, this is the complex versus complicated, broken up into little things that we can reason about and understand. And if you want to learn tricks on how to do that better, go watch Sandy's talk. I've watched it a dozen times probably at this point. I put the bit.ly link, but you can probably just Google for magic tricks of testing. And she goes into just the perfect level of detail on how to handle, like, do you test outgoing messages, queries versus commands, and how to break that down. And it's just good, solid basics that even though I've been doing this for years, I didn't get and didn't know how to talk about in the right way. So we got our high-level integration, we got our unit tests, and then we have all the stuff in between. The problem with all the stuff in between is how much do you test it? So really, I don't like to do a lot of testing. I will do very almost laughable kind of controller tests, because as soon as anything gets anywhere close to complicated, I pull it out and put it into a model somewhere that I can actually reason about, and we have a name for, and it does a bunch of stuff, and then I unit test it. So as far as that goes, when my controller only instantiates and call a method, and then the other stuff worries about it, it keeps all of that very light. And so for the most part, I want all the in-between, the connecting, the stuff that wires stuff up to be covered by my acceptance integration level tests, and to not repeat that over and over again. And that's all great, except that that won't work. And this is really where it comes down to, you have to pay attention to the domain you're working in. What does your app do? What does the business want? What do you want out of your project? Talk to the people that are working on it and come up with the things that actually matter, and have that debate over, do we care because that this controller handles this? Like, maybe you do, maybe it's integral to how the app works, but on the other hand, you'll have other projects where you're like, I don't care at all. I need a good solid unit test suite and a couple of happy path tests, and I'll be happy. So now that we kind of have this philosophical thing, let's go over the basics. What are the moving parts of a test? This is the classic: act, arrange, assert, arrange, act, assert. So you set things up, you do something, and then you check to see that it did what you hoped it did. So arrange, you want to set up all the necessary inputs. You want to create the objects you're going to need. This is what goes in your setup block or in your test helper. Now you actually want to call the thing, make sure that your method, actually invoke your method, create your object, whatever, and then check the output. Did it do what I expected it to do? And make sure that everything is working together. So now we know all of those different parts. How do we keep the walls from closing in? How do we know that the toilet paper isn't just coming off the roll? So before you can know that things are getting out of control, everything needs to be kind of tidy. And cooking, my wife likes to cook a lot, and she goes to proper real cooking classes with where they say things like mise en pas. And in a proper real kitchen, the chef is very meticulous about making sure that everything is exactly where it goes all the time, and that your clothes are neat and your knives are sharp, and they do all of their prep and make sure that it's set up. And so when something's out of place, So if you're kind of making a suite and you're just going to kind of shove, a little extra setup, or you'll kind of test that other model inside this one, that's where things are getting out of order and not in their place, and that should be a warning. So that happens a lot easier if things aren't tidy. If it's already a little bit messy, it's hard to tell that it's just a slightly bit more than that. So one of the things that I really advocate for is mirror your lib directory. So you're writing a gem, you have a lib directory, it has all your code in it. Your spec or test or whatever directory should have the same structure. So if you have folders in your lib directory called models, you should have folders called models in the other one, And this is just so that when I come back in 6 months after I wrote it, that I can figure out where I put the test, because I don't remember what my code is supposed to do just by looking at it. And so I need to be able to just locate the file that's related to the thing I'm working on. When I talked about this before, we had a fairly involved discussion over what about the other things? What about the acceptance tests? Where do those go? Normally I would say make a folder called acceptance. That's what we call it when we're talking about it. So if that's what you say to your coworker or your friends, then that's probably a good name for it in the code. So, let's try to keep it as close to the jargon that we're using just to discuss, because that'll be the most natural thing and the most obvious thing as we're going through. So again, step back, look at your domain, what things matter, and what things get grouped together. Setting things up, managing the state, figuring out how objects should be broken out or extracted into different libraries or models or whatever, pretty much it's all after the system you're trying to model. And real-world systems are complicated and messy, so it takes serious thought to kind of wedge that square peg in the round hole. But that's exactly what we're trying to do. And the best way to do this is step back, figure out which things can go together, what can be abstracted, and actually make sense and not just become, this leaky abstraction that you're going to be battling with. So managing setup, this is the thing that I feel like we need to be really, really careful about. And this is, the context of setting up your tests. And so here I've got a little pseudocode, or a lot of pseudocode. You don't have to read this and understand. It's a little bit nonsensical and completely contrived. But the idea is, you have like some sort of spec type setup where you have a bunch of like describe blocks saying this is what I'm going to do, and then you have some setup stuff that sets up the thing, and then you do actually run your test to see if it does what you're hoping it would do. So if we look at it, here's where we're setting everything up, and the problem I have is when I TDD something, this happens very naturally. And I feel like I'll TDD something and the code that results is really nice and clean. Because I'm like kind of building this API from the outside, writing the stuff that I want it to do. But then I'm like, oh yeah, admin users. And so I'm like, okay, well, when this user is an admin. And so I have the setup of the user has an address and the user doesn't have a credit card. And they're not an admin. I'm like, and then I can just tack on they are an admin. And then I'll be going through something else where the user has a bunch of products and the user has these other things and they have a bunch of posts. Oh yeah, and they're an admin. And so now you got this like intermingled mess, and we have to be very careful because this happens, well, at least for me, it happens very naturally. Like this just kind of flows as I think through all the different cases. So what I'm kind of arguing for is let's flatten everything out. And so I'm not too scared of big complicated setups as long as they happen all together and they represent a situation that matters in my domain. So I have a web, e-commerce store, and there's orders and admin users and downloads and shipments and addresses. Well, you can probably group these things into a bit of an abstraction where you have an admin user that has valid billing information, and you have a regular user that doesn't have valid billing information, and you have a regular user that does. And those are the big blocks at the top. So a lot of this is more stopping. I got my test green, and now I'm going to turn to one of my coworkers, and I'm going to talk these things over, and we're going to figure out what the situations that we care about, and refactor and move those setups to the things that matter. That's also the step that I'm like, okay, these are covered by the acceptance tests. I don't care about them here, and just kind of that red-green refactor cycle, but spending that extra time in that refactor so that things just kind of stay proper, nice and tidy, and I can read it and actually understand, because if I come back to it, I'm not going to understand this in 6 months. but I could go through here and read the setup of, oh, I have an admin and that user has an address. So here's actually, these are the places where you're setting things up. And I'd say, just like resources, it's kind of okay to have one extra level. And often this will just save you a ton of costs. There's time and effort to set up the different situations. And I actually really care about some situation where an admin user doesn't have an address or something like that, and so I just kind of set it to nil so that I can test it, because we decided that was important. And as long as that's passable when you're discussing it with coworkers, that's completely okay. But once I get past those like 2 levels and I start to want to tack in more and more, and I always do, that's when I'm like, hold on, we need to step back. There's probably something else. This is a smell that tells me that there's something wrong with my actual main project, and we need to go back and revisit that, and figure out why just setting up the test has become so complicated. Okay. So now you're thinking about how to manage your test suite, and that is awesome. Just keep in mind, step back and understand, look at the domain, look at the app, and see what actually matters. Discuss things by not looking necessarily at the code, but then figure out what those things that matter and come back in and refactor. Prioritize the things that are important, figure out where you want to go, what your goal is, and let's just iterate as we're going that way. I put bad in quotes because the tests probably aren't as bad as you think. If you actually think about your tests, then you are way ahead of the pack. Most people don't. Anybody who is beginning and trying to do this right the first time, there is no right the first time. And just the fact that you're thinking about it is the win. Martin Fowler had a really great quote that says, imperfect tests run frequently are much better than perfect tests that are never written at all. We should absolutely be doing it that way. Like, get it to work. Get that first. You can come back and change it. That's one of the main reasons we're writing tests in the first place, is so that we can come back and change it. Don't get caught up in the, is this right or not? But let's have the goal. Try not to get too far off track and just iterate in that direction. Finally, Minuswan. Who knows what Minuswan means? About half. Maths is nice, and so we are nice. Well-tested code that I can understand is nice. So I feel like we can still apply Minuswan. I really love this kind of tenet of our community. And as such, I've made a bunch of Minuswan stickers. They look like this. If you want one, come and find me. I got a big stack of them. Any questions? Looks like we have a few minutes. All right. Thank you.